He's just 25 years old and he's already the captain of the Indian team. Grandmaster Vidit Gujrathi has had a lot of hats to don in this online Olympiad. He has had to make sure that everything is okay with the team. He has had to play his own games, help others in the preparation, but he is doing so admirably. And one of the games that he won at this event against Rasmus Svane was an amazing game. I want to show you how Vidit, when pushed to the wall, still fought really hard and managed to come out on the top. Now this game was played in round number 8 and it was a crucial encounter between India and Germany, the top board encounter. And Rasmus Svane is a very good, strong, young German grandmaster with a rating of 2644. He opens the game with one knight f3 and Vidit goes for d5, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, d4, knight f6. So you see complete symmetry on the board, castles, castles. And now usually white goes for the move c4, but here he went for c3. This might seem slightly passive, but it has been played by many strong players, including, Kramnik and others. So he played c3 and now Vidit broke the symmetry by playing knight bd7, a4, and Vidit stopped the a pawn with a5. Bishop jumped out to f4 and now c6. So you can see that white has a small edge here because he was able to bring his bishop out while the bishop on c8 is blocked by his own knight. Now white went for queen to b3. I like how Vidit now tackles the next phase of the game. He first goes knight h5, attacking the bishop, and after the bishop moves he goes h6, pushing the bishop back, and now e6. This is typical Vidit. He goes very solid. He's not trying to hurry. After c4 he just develops his queen to e7, also looking at this b4 square. At some point that could become useful. Queen went back to c2, and now here's a nice moment to think for a bit. What would you play here as black? I like Vidit's next move. Just for the sake of simplicity, this knight is not doing so well, so he brings it back to f6. There are other moves that you might have considered like f5 here, but it's just not right now in the spirit of the position. Vidit wants to first coordinate his pieces, and here rook d1 was played. I believe that Vidit's idea after knight f6 was to go to e4, and hence knight d2 or knight c3 would have been much more logical, but both have their own problems. For example, knight d2 is met with knight g4 when the bishop starts to feel uncomfortable. Over here you may lose the important bishop, and if you go knight c3, then after d into c4 you lose the c4 pawn. It's true that you can play knight a3, but then that doesn't stop the knight from coming to e4. So knight f6, rook d1, and Vidit played knight to e4. And here I was surprised with white's move. He played knight fd2. In fact, he should have gone nbd2 here, and then if, like in the game, we can follow it. We'll come to what the difference is, but first knight d2. What would you play here as black? That is the question. Think like Vidit. Pause the video and try to think. Well, Vidit played a fine move, a fantastic move, knight d6, and actually it's a twofold idea. First of all, he's putting pressure on c4 pawn, so the knight cannot move, but also very importantly he's planning knight to f5. This is easy to miss, that the knight from d6 can jump to f5 and attack the bishop. Also, if the bishop moves to f4, you can always win it with g5. And remember, knight f5 also puts pressure on d4 pawn. That is very, very essential. So now if we come back and see that if knight d2, knight d6, and here bishop f4 is played, then knight f5, you can already play e4 because the knight on f3 is defending the pawn on d4. But in the game, after knight fd2, knight d6, Rasmus had to take here because otherwise he would have been losing the d4 pawn. So cd, let's say if he went bishop f4, there is knight f5. So cd was played, ed, knight f3 and knight f6, and you can see the complete victory of Vidit's setup. He has a strong pawn chain in the center. His knights are looking at the wonderful e4 square. The c4 square is in his control. b4 is slightly weak. Bishop is coming out to f5. So great successful opening, just with this very nice idea of moving his knight from h5 to f6 to e4 to d6. And the knight has just simply by moving 4 times has given black a great position. So knight f6 was played here, and now knight c3, bishop to f5, queen went to c1. Queen b3 is a nice variation which shows how all these weaknesses are taken advantage of. You first attack the bishop moves, and now g5, bishop c1, queen to b4. The queen is fantastically placed here and is completely winning for black. You know, it's a very, very strong position. So queen c1, and now king h7, defending the h6 pawn here, which was attacked. Bishop f4, and now the knight jumped from d to e4. I believe knight f e4 might have been a better option so as to keep some control on the e5 square, but it doesn't change things much. Bishop e5, knight g4, he took on g7, king g7, and now you see the f2 pawn is attacked. So Rasmus went and defended. This is where the game starts becoming very interesting. Vidit could have just naturally and normally developed his rook to e8 and he would have kept a small advantage for sure. But what he did was he took on c3. He was like, you take back and I will snatch a pawn. And what could be more natural than this? You know, snatching the pawn on e2. But here is where white starts to sort of release himself. He starts to get counterplay with first h3, pushing the knight. Knight goes back, and then knight jumps to e5. So this knight is very, very well placed. Rook e1 is coming next, and if I can put this bishop away, then rook b1 can also put pressure in this direction. Vidit played knight to e4, and now rook to b1, a fine move, putting pressure here. Also threatening to evict the queen with rook b2. Now if knight d6 would have been played, I think Rasmus would have gone rook b2, but Vidit went back with his queen. This is where I felt that the queen is slightly away from the scene of action. This king is a little bit weak and the queen is away, and g4 first, pushing the bishop, bishop e6, and now queen to e3, threatening to win a pawn. And here Vidit played rook f e8, which was a very surprising move because you see the rook is going to be useful in defense. So you need the other rook to come in. So why not rook a e8? That was the question. Maybe this is where Vidit had already started feeling a bit nervous. He played rook f e8, and now instead of picking up this pawn, which is possible, but then the bishop sits on d5 and you can push the knight away with f6, Rasmus went f4, and a very, very strong move. He is threatening the move f5. Now Vidit went f6, and this is where a lot of engines were suggesting the move f5. In the game, white played knight into g6, a very good sacrifice, but we will come to this in a bit. f5, and actually I was on Surya Ganguly's show where he showed me this variation, and he said after fe, bishop into e4, de, f into e6, rook into e6, queen f2, he asked me the question, how should black save this position? And I'm going to do the same with you. Surya is well known for finding some great positions, and this is one of them. And it looks like black is completely losing because queen f7 is coming, then rook into b7 is threatened. You can't move your queen. Your rook cannot come to e7 because queen f6, you lose the rook. But black is able to defend, and I can show you the variation. So if you have thought about the move, here it is, king h8. This is a brilliant move because now if the queen comes into f7, threatening rook into b7 as well as threatening the e6 rook. There comes queen to d3 with check and check, and that's a draw there. So therefore he has to place, let's say I move ahead with king g2, now check, rook f2, and I take. And after you take here, now again the only move for black to hold, rook g8, queen takes e5, rook g7, rook f8, king h7, and just when it looks like you're going to again checkmate him, comes queen c2, king f1, queen c1, and it's a perpetual check over here. And that's how black manages to save himself in this position. What a variation. And well, I don't know if Vidit would have found all the nuances, but his position was tenable. Knight into g6, king into g6, and now came the move bishop takes e4. Of course, if you played f5, then I can move my king back, and then if you take my, this is better for black because his knight is controlled by the rook. So first on e4, take on e4, de, and now f5 is a solid move, because now after king g7, fe, rook into e6. Let's try to assess this position. Black is a pawn up, but in return his queen is out of the game, his king is weak, and it seems as if this rook is continuously putting pressure, so the queen cannot even move. So taking all of this into consideration, I felt that white is doing much better here after rook f5. It was a very tense moment, and it felt like Vidit's blunder was just around the corner. But Vidit kept control. He played rook f8, then he went rook h8, and he was ready for a draw. If you try to go rook f5, maybe I'll go rook f8, and that's fine. But why? Why should white make a draw? He went c4. You can't take the pawn because rook b7 ends up with a rook penetrating, and it would be a very strong position. So rook went back to e7. Again, a very calm and cool move, defending the pawn, threatening now to take on c4. So Rasmus went rook c5, defending the pawn, and now queen to a7. Maybe the queen can come from here into the game if required. It's just waiting. Rook f1, and here came queen to b6. I really like this move by Vidit, because the moment this file was given up, now he can go queen b4 or queen b2, and this is what top players do. They take their chances whenever it's offered to them. Rook f5, rook d8. Now if you take on f6 after queen d4, the queen is pinned, and this is a better position for black. So rook c5 was played. If you play even c5, then queen b2 is very strong. So rook c5, and now Vidit went in, queen into b2, now attacking this pawn. White pushed, and there was a very strong move which was giving black an advantage. I feel that Vidit could have found it in a classical game, but with very less time on the clock, it was very difficult. He could have played the move queen to b4, and you see this rook is completely tied down, and queen b4 is actually a prophylaxis against d into c6. Why? Because if you take d into c6, I jump in with my rook to d3. You have to keep control of this rook. So you go queen f2. Now you go rook f3, queen d4, takes, and e3. And this is big trouble for white. So that's the reason why queen b4 would have been strong, kind of trapping the rook on c5. But Vidit took cd, and now queen came back to e5. This is where we started to feel that Vidit's position looks good. His queen has come back into the game. He's attacking the d5 pawn. White went rook f5, queen a1, rook f1, and Rasmus was very ambitious. He went for the win. King g2, king g3, and now again bringing the queen back. Queen d6, rook e5 he took, and now when rook b5 was played, actually here white should have gone for queen g3, and it's a very interesting variation. Maybe this is something you can work it out at home. Rook d5, queen e5, rook e5, rook e5, f e5, and this pawn endgame, which is so complicated, ends in a draw. I can just show you a sample line. h4, king f6, king f2, king e6, king e3, b5, takes a4, b6, king d6, g5, hg, hg, a3, g6, a2, b7, king c7, g7, queen, queen takes, and then finally you will lose both of these pawns and it will be a draw. Okay, so in the game he did not play queen g3, he played rook b5, and that gave Vidit the chance with rook d7 first, and after h4 he played rook to c7, and the rook is coming in, and now came the final blunder of the game, king h3, and can you spot the winning move? Rook to c3, and the queen is pinned. The rest is simple. Vidit converted. He brought his king into the game, and that's where Rasmus resigned because he's losing the queen. This game just showed how Vidit, under tremendous pressure, in fact when his opponent took on g6, he was low on time, and I think any player would have kind of blundered in the coming moves, but like Captain Cool, like Mahendra Singh Dhoni, Vidit kept his cool. He did not lose it at any point and managed to not just draw the game but win it for his side, and that just shows how well he's doing here. And I hope that he plays well against Armenia and in subsequent rounds as well. But for now, let's just enjoy this game. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with more content, leaving you with some of the footage of the live commentary that we did from that day. This is Sagar Shah signing off. Bye bye. But Samay, this guy Rasmus is threatening f5. He's saying, look, your queen is on a6, slightly out of the game. Now your king on g7 is lonely. I am coming at you. I'm going to give my pawn up, f5. You take, and then I'm going to use my queen, rook, bishop, and knight to attack your king. Ooh, and queen on a6 is like, what? How do I get back into the game? I need to come back. How do I do it? Oh, he took on g6. My god, look at this. What a sacrifice. If you play king into g6, bishop into e4, d into e4, and then f5, and suddenly this is what we were fearing all throughout. When the black king is all alone, queen on a6, and he has launched an attack against the king. I think Vidit is under big pressure.
Hey, dude, come in, living in rook c3 check. Wow.
Yes, Vidit has done it. Vidit has done it. Vidit, please take care of your internet. He has pinned the queen. Only thing required is now to make you. At the last moment, that was like a fighter. He was like a gladiator. Vidit has done it. Vidit has done it. His opponent will resign now. He's won it. No internet issues today for Vidit, and he's done it well played.
Don't be in the chat, guys. Look at his face cam. Just a sigh of relief. And now we are left to
Vidit, one question. If you go to playing Taj in future rounds, will you also put Black Lotus in the background?
Good one.
So Vidit, what's the mood? And congratulations, you played amazingly against Rasmus Svane. I think you were big pressure, you fought back. What a win. Great play.
It was very crazy pressure game. And also, like, since morning, all the games have been so crazy. Like Hari Krishna swindle in round 1, and it's like very tense for me.